Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for In Purgatory's Shadow and By Inferno's Light, which are episodes 14 and 15 of Season 5 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the two-part episodes In Purgatory's Shadow and By Inferno's Light. So, this two-parter is the episodes in which Garak and Worf go on a mission to the Gamma Quadrant to rescue Anabra and Tain. However, they end up getting captured themselves and thrown into a prison with Tain, who dies, and right before Garak makes him admit that he is in fact his father. However, also in this prison is the real Martok, which we actually never met before, and Julian Bashir, who was supposed to be on the station. So it's revealed that the Bashir we've seen on the station for the past 4 episodes was in fact a changeling, impersonating Bashir. However, Worf gets out a message before he's captured to the station, warning that the Dominion have a fleet that are on their way, so Deep Space Nine prepares for a Dominion invasion. However, when the Dominion fleet comes to the wormhole, they just immediately set course for Cardassia. Gul Dukat joins them and admits that he has negotiated a peace between the Dominion and Cardassia, where the Cardassians have joined the Dominion. So the Dominion fleet are going to set up a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant in Cardassian space. So Dukat, as the new leader of Cardassia, vows to retake all Cardassian property, including colonies stolen by the Maquis, or colonies that have been conquered by the Klingons, and also Deep Space Nine, since that was originally a Cardassian station. So they threatened to have a big fleet come and attack this station and take over Bashir again. And so Sisko manages to make peace with the Klingons, convincing Gowron to sign the Khitomer Accords, and the Klingons and Starfleet set up huge fleets in preparation for the Dominion's fleet arrival, and the Romulans also send ships, and so it's set to be a big showdown. Meanwhile, Garak manages to contact the runabout and effectuate their escape, so they all escape and go back towards the Alpha Quadrant, and they send a message from the real Bashir letting them know that there is a changeling infiltrator on their ship, on the station and we find out that there is no Dominion fleet coming towards Deep Space Nine, that the whole plan was for the changeling to set off a bomb in the Bajoran sun that would cause a supernova that would destroy all the Klingon Starfleet and Romulan fleets, while also destroying Deep Space Nine and Bashir. However, yes, because Bashir warned them, Kira is able to get there in time to stop this from happening, and they manage to avert disaster, and they starve off war for another day. So, I call this two-parter, I call it Course Correction, the two-parter. And, yeah, one time I mentioned that, I heard someone say, no, actually I liked it. I actually think it's a good episode. Which would suggest that I was implying that the episodes were bad by calling it Course Correction, the two-parter, but that's not the case. If anything, that makes it really good. So this is an end of an era. As far as my reviews go, it's the end of me complaining about the Klingons being enemies when they should be allies. It's the end of me complaining about Dukat being a good guy, or turning into a good guy when he's fucking Hitler. Yeah, it's so for the show it was a course correction. The show was going in the wrong direction ever since season 4 of Deep Space Nine. Ever since the Way of the Warrior, where they introduced the whole Klingon conflict. Now, the other storyline that was a huge mistake doesn't come to an end in this episode. It's a few more episodes down the line, which is Worf's discommodation and being an exile and outsider. They pretty but pretty much resolve it in the episode Soldiers of the Empire, which is just it's not that far away. Just a few more episodes down the line, so it's close. So I do wonder, because I know, and I've talked about this before, that the Klingon War, or Klingons being enemies, storyline was a decree from the studio. It's not something that the writers really wanted to do. In fact, some of them resented it and thought that they should have focused more on the Dominion. And so my impression, because I do know that the producers and Rick Berman, during season 4 in particular, were interfering heavily because they were expecting Deep Space Nine to get higher ratings. But at some stage, it is said that they kind of just gave up on the show, and it's fine, just do whatever the hell you want, and hardly ever interfered with the show going forward, and instead put all their intention to interfering and making Voyager worse, and pretty much left Deep Space Nine alone. And so it's my guess that this marks the true era of that happening, the true era of Rick Berman being maybe that could have happened at the start of season 5 and they're just now getting around to it. I mean, that could be the case, but this marks the era of them being I don't care, do whatever the hell you want. And so what the hell they want is to focus on the Dominion, to make the Cardassians and Gul Dukat the villains, and to focus on the Dominion instead of the Klingons, and the Klingons instead would be uneasy allies, which is what they should have been all along. And so when I first saw this 2-parter, I can't tell you how excited I was. I don't know if there's been another time in Star Trek, maybe the 2-parter, the DS9, when it was, that was the first time we got this, political intrigue or, war on a large scale. They usually kind of avoided that thing. And I'm not just talking about the Borg invading Federation space. I mean, there's tons of different aliens and different players, and there's ins and outs, and there's scheming and all this. To me, DS9 is really the first time. Well, in Purgatory, what's the first one? I'm getting confused with this 2-part. Improbable Cause, that's the one I'm looking for. That's really the one that introduced it, that first got into all this, and it made the whole universe feel bigger. And so that might have been the only other time I've been this excited. And also when I saw that they were finally correcting everything, that they were fixing the mistake and they were getting back to what Deep Space Nine should focus on, I was ecstatic. I was over the moon. I can't even tell you how happy I was. And because of that, I thought of this 2-parter very highly. I thought, wow, this is amazing. One of the best 2-parters of the show. Absolutely love it. But after I had some time to calm down and look at this 2-parter objectively, I was it's not bad. I still like it, but it's not that great. And I think some people still hold it up like it's one of the greatest 2-parters or episodes of DS9, and I disagree. I think it has a lot of flaws. But before I get into those flaws, I do want to focus more on the course correction aspect of it. Um, so the Klingons. It's funny because the real Martok and the changeling impersonating Martok are like totally different. It does make one wonder how these Klingons couldn't have noticed a massive different change in character. Or maybe the real Martok could have been humbled a bit more after being imprisoned by the Dominion. That could be the case. But this was like a necessary writing exercise to do because the Klingons should be allies. And it makes sense if they're going to have a Klingon character become a recurring character who stays on Deep Space Nine and becomes good friends with Worf. It kind of makes sense that it would be an actor character we've seen before. And so Martok is a good choice. And again, the explanation of why he's now like a really good, friendly, nice guy, where before he was a total dick, was, well, he was a changeling before, tracks. If is a bit flawed, like I just pointed out, though. It's like, why didn't they notice the massive change in character? But leaving that aside, that makes sense. It's logical instead of introducing a new Klingon character. And also, I've heard them say in interviews before that they were so impressed with J.G. Hertzler that they wanted to bring him back even after his character died, similar to Weyoun. But in this case, they don't have to invent the whole thing about cloning because the explanation's already there. That wasn't the real Martok that died. That was just a changeling impersonating Martok, so there's still a real Martok out there. Kind of similar to like Discovery when they talked about Lorca, where Lorca, spoilers for season 1 of Discovery, but Lorca was actually from the Mirror Universe. And so everyone kept expecting to see the real, like the Prime Universe Lorca, because we knew it was out there. So they could have went in that direction had they wanted to, but clearly they didn't want to because it never happened. But in this case, they could say, oh, here's the real Martok. And this episode does a great job of setting up for Martok, the friendship between Martok and Worf, and Martok being an ally to Starfleet. Like, it does a really good job at that, and then you do kind of buy that the Klingons are going to be more friendly. I still maintain that this should have been the plan all along. At season 4, they wanted to introduce Worf. They should have had it in the context of the Klingons becoming more friendly with Starfleet and putting a contingent on Deep Space Nine to fight the Dominion. But anyway, I'm sorry, I am rehashing that yet again. And also, another thing I feel like I need to rehash is the fact that the Klingons being in hot war at the start of the season, and we're at episode 14, and now the Klingons are good buddies with Starfleet, how that's like whiplash, and I don't really buy it. It does make it hard to buy, but when I was thinking about it when I was watching this episode, I guess it could make a little bit of sense, because Gowron was initially very resistant towards it. It's like, that peace treaty is dead, and Sisko makes an argument look, this is the last thing the Dominion wants. The Dominion are the threat of the Dominion putting a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant does change things a lot. And so I can kind of buy that Gowron or the Klingons would be willing to go from ripping Starfleet officers' heads off and to working with them within a span of a few months, which I still think is ridiculous, and blowing up Starfleet ships and killing hundreds and thousands of Federation citizens, go from that and just a few months later we're best buddies now. But I guess extreme circumstances could allow for such extreme shifts. But I still think the whole show would have been better had they never gone that way. Even if they had to do the stupid Klingons being adversaries in Season 4 storyline, fine, but don't make them be in a hot war at the start of Season 5. Like, that was a massive mistake. They could have had, like, the threat of war, like, looming, but to actually make them go to war and have Klingons rip off Starfleet officers' heads and kill hundreds and thousands of civilians, there's no going back for that. I mean, there is, because they went back from it anyway, but it feels fake. It doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, even if you say the extreme circumstances of the Dominion, is still very hard to swallow. Now, as for the change with the Cardassians joining the Dominion, which is kind of tied into Dukat. But if I can, I want to separate those things out. But, because I think this makes all the sense in the world that Cardassia would join the Dominion. They said it was, the current state of Cardassia was based off of, and you can kind of tell this, I think it's really obvious that it's based off of history, particularly Germany between World War I and World War II, how it was very impoverished, it was weakened, its people were miserable, it was falling apart because after they were defeated in World War I, the Western powers kind of were just destroying the country financially, and this led to the rise of Hitler, who promised to bring Germany back to greatness, to make Germany great again. Sorry, I had to say it. Promised to bring it back to greatness, and it used military force, fascism, and sorry, I'm talking about Germany, not right now. But anyway, used fascism and the hatred of other. God damn it! That kid. The more I talk, the more I think what's happening right now. But anyway, sorry. Put that aside. Uses fascism and hatred of, in this case, the Jews. And blaming everything on the Jews. That was their point. Oh, the reason why you're poor and the reason why if we're in financial issues because these Jews are prospering. So they're ratting, they're vermins, and we need to exterminate them and conquer them. And it's that sort of having that scapegoat of immigrants and trans people. I'm sorry, I meant Jews. I meant to say Jews. Sorry. Having those scapegoats to blame all their issues on, and turn the country into a fascist dictatorship that would start a gigantic war that would try to conquer the world. And so, yeah, there's many parallels in here, because some people, I've heard someone question, like, how could Dukat take over the government? But it's based off the whole Hitler thing, that Cardassia is in that same sort of weakened state of, being conquered by the Klingons and almost overrun by the Maquis, and they're falling apart. And originally this led to, like, the defeat of the Obsidian Order in Season 3 led to the rise of civilian government, because we saw this tease throughout Season 2 and 3 about how there's this Cardassian dissident movement that wants to give more power back to the civilian government and sort of, not be a fascist dictatorship, and that actually succeeded at the start of Season 4, and again, mainly because of the collapse of the Obsidian Order. But it just so happens it kind of led to, at the same time, the Klingons attacking them, and then because of the Klingons, doing so much damage to Cardassia, the Maquis were emboldened, so they did more damage to Cardassia, and they just financially weakened them. So it would make sense why this civilian government would be extremely unpopular, and that the Cardassian populace would be willing to accept a fascist dictator. Like, because inflation is rising, the current leader is too old. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with something else. But anyway, and people were worried about too many border crossings. No, sorry. But yeah, so it makes sense why the current Cardassian civilian government would be discarded, and that the people would embrace a fascist dictator like Dukat, and that they would be okay with Cardassia joining the Dominion, even though I'm sure that Dukat really tried to sugarcoat it. Like, we do see some of that in his speech of how he tries to sugarcoat how this would be great for Cardassia. But really, and this is something that some Cardassians realize towards the end of the show when we get the Cardassian Rebellion, but really it is allowing the Dominion to conquer them without firing a shot. They have this pretense of being partners, of being allies, but really, especially the way they phrase it, they don't phrase it like, Dominion is having being allies with the Cardassians. No, they're saying Cardassia is joining the Dominion. So Cardassia is effectively no longer independent. They are now part of the Dominion, kind of like Vulcan is part of the Federation. And Dukat tries to sugarcoat this and sell this, and as I said, I totally buy that people would be willing to swallow this. They'd be willing to buy it because of the weakened state Cardassia is in, and the fact that it would allow Cardassia to be strong again, financially, militarily, and become like a superpower in the region again, which they were desperately at risk of winking out. So it's very similar to the whole Hitler's rise in Germany. So I completely buy it 100%. And the other thing they said that they based this off of was the aspect of Cardassia willing to join the Dominion and be conquered by the Dominion without firing a shot, which is something Damar says. I believe he uses that phrase, and that towards the end of season 7, because this is when they start to finally realize that they're not true partners. Like, Dominion still puts up the facade of them being partners, and we'll see this, but when push comes to shove, especially when Damar takes over, they're like, no, you are under our control. But yeah, so the reason why they would be willing to do this, and the parallel to history is that they were drawing from, was Austria, because apparently the Austrian government decided to allow the Nazi Party to take over. Like, they said, they agreed for Nazi Germany to absorb them, and so that's what they were basing this off of. And again, this makes a lot of sense. It makes all the sense in the world. And also, it's a major play for the Dominion to establish a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant, because the thing about the Dominion War that's hard to do is because they're in the Gamma Quadrant, which is 70,000 light years away or something like that. It would take 40, 50 years, 60. Didn't they say it was like 80 years or something? It would take something like 80 years to travel from like where the Federation, where the Cardassians, where the Klingons is. It would take them like 80 years to travel to where the Dominion is. But then you have this wormhole that connects the two, where you can travel instantly from Dominion space. Well, not instantly, but because Dominion has talked about Dominion space is a bit further from the wormhole, which, by the way, this episode confirms that to be the case. because the Dominion had to hide a fleet in a nebula because they can't. If they had it close to the wormhole, then their Federation would be able to detect it, and so they have to slowly advance on the wormhole, which again establishes that Dominion space is further away from the wormhole. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Point is, this is a very different dynamic than any sort of real life scenario, because in this case you have a very small, like tiny microscopic in the terms of galactic, scale, tiny bottleneck that the Dominion must go through in order to get to the Alpha Quadrant. And I'll talk about this more as I get in, or I already did most of season 6, so I've already talked about this, but when I do my revisits and whatnot, I'll talk about this more, about how many of the things they do, like at the start of season 6 and at the end of season 5, actually don't make any sense, because the Starfleet and everyone in the Klingons should be prioritizing the wormhole, because you have such a tiny bottleneck that it makes it by far the most essential piece of real estate in the whole war to control. And the fact that they weren't prioritizing it as much as they should have, I thought was a giant flaw in the storytelling. But that's a complaint for another time. Point is, as far as this episode's concerned, first of all, they have Bashir changeling. When the Federation tried to destroy or at least collapse the wormhole, not destroy it, because the Prophets would still be safe, but they tried to make it so ships couldn't enter and exit it, and the Bashir changeling was there. He was able to sabotage it so that it had the exact opposite effect, that it made the wormhole like harder to close, that it made it, propped it open even further. That kind of, that makes a lot of sense, because that's the tiny little bottleneck, and they don't want to risk it being closed. And now, like, they even suggested that even if they tried to destroy the wormhole, they wouldn't be able to. And so, yeah, so that makes sense. And then they would send the Dominion fleets to Cardassia to establish a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant, which is definitely important, because they no longer, if they have established bases in the Alpha Quadrant, they don't have to worry about that bottleneck, that tiny little bottleneck anymore. But it also makes sense of why they tried to destroy Deep Space Nine and Bajor with the bomb, because then they wouldn't have their enemy being stationed so close to that bottleneck, which does come in play at the end of season 5 when Sisko does decide to do something about it and set up a minefield, which of course leads to Dominion taking the station back from them, because they want to have access to the most important piece of real estate in the entire war. So that makes sense totally, that the Dominion would be willing, because I thought at one point I was thinking, isn't it kind of whiplash for the Dominion? Because in season 4, the female changeling told Garak, like, you're dead. All Cardassians are dead because you tried to kill us. And it did seem that they were backtracking by saying, oh, actually, the Cardassia is part of the Dominion now. But it actually makes so much sense strategically that they would be willing to look past it, because in fact it was not Dukat, it was an Aberrantane and the Obsidian Order, which are now completely wiped out. And so it would be ridiculous for them to hold that grudge against, like, Dukat, when he comes with this perfect offer for a foothold, for them to establish a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant, which would be 100% essential to them conquering the Alpha Quadrant. Like, they, as advanced as their technology is, they would not be able to do it if they didn't have a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant. As we see with Sisko putting in the minefield, if they didn't have that foothold in the Alpha Quadrant, they'd be fucked with that minefield. So basically, this is the start. It's not the start of the Dominion War. It's the start of the build-up to the Dominion War. I mean, you could say, oh, the start was build-up to Dominion War was, the Jem'Hadar when they were first introduced, but not really. That was more of like a Cold War, because as we see, it was implied in season 4 that it would just stagnate and that the Dominion weren't an imminent threat. They implied that, of course, because they wanted to focus more on the Klingons. Gag. I already talked about that. But this is the start of the build up to the war. Not just the Cold War. I think a Cold War is what it was before this. This is becoming a hot war. War is inevitable at this stage. It's just only a matter of when will it break out. So people like to give Sisko shit about starting the war, but that was going to happen. Like, there was no hiding it. I think it was smart for Starfleet to start it on their terms and not let the Dominion start it, because they were going to start it when they were at full power. So it changes the whole dynamic of the show in the best possible way. So, let me get to Dukat. This was the change of him. I complained about this so much in my reviews of Indiscretion and Return to Grace, that they were making him too much of a good guy, trying to make him relatable. In this episode, like, from the very beginning, he's like being an asshole to Kira about why she let Ziyal hang out with Garak, and he's being very forceful with Ziyal, saying, oh, you have to come back, whatever. And so from the beginning of the episode, he's showing himself to be an asshole, even when he's pretending to be Sisko's ally, but then he totally reveals that, no, I've joined the Dominion, fuck you guys. And it's funny because that line he has where he says to Kira, you and I, his allies, didn't feel right, did it? And 100%! Like, this is what I've been saying all along. Like, I feel like it's kind of a meta thing for the writers telling the audience, like, you didn't think Dukat was a friend, did you? You didn't think he was a good guy? Didn't that feel wrong when he was being friends with Kira? Yes! 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 100%. Now, I was just reading that Ira Stephen Bear was saying that it was never the plan to make Dukat a good guy. That was always the plan to, explore him a bit more, have him be a bit friendly with the Federation, but ultimately go back to being the ultimate villain that he should be. Like, it was always their plan. And there are some people out there who don't like the portrayal of Dukat going forward as a villain, particularly when you get into season 7 or episodes like Waltz. But I totally disagree with these people. I think that they misunderstood Dukat's character. He was Hitler. From the very beginning, he was seen as someone who tortured Bajorans to death. He should not be portrayed as a good guy. And as I talked about in my review of Return to Grace, I think they went too far with making him a nice guy. Yes, he was still being a dick, he was still being an asshole, still hitting on Kira, but they made him too much of a good guy. They just did. So I think they went too far with it. So it was so nice. Again, this course correction of the episode fixes so much. It fixes Dukat is and it's such a brilliant storytelling. Forget about the logic, in-universe logic. It's just a brilliant storytelling decision to have Cardassia join the Dominion, because Cardassians were established from the very start of the show as the villains of the show, and then they introduced the Dominion at the end of season 2, who are seen as the big bad guys. And so to have the two join up and both be the villains magnifique. And the Klingons are supposed to be allies. So having them join up against the Federation Klingon alliance, like they should have done this from the very fucking beginning. God, I can't stress that enough. But anyway, I know. I talked about this a lot. So yeah, it's just brilliant, and it's brilliant having Dukat be the face of this. That he is the ultimate villain, which he should be. He was always introduced to be that. He's not your friend. He never was your friend, and they went too far with making him appear to be your friend. Now, I was reading something on Memory Alpha that I disagreed with, because it described this episode as being the end of the Dukat becoming more of an ally storyline, which I agree with, but they said it started in the Maquis Part 2, which I do agree with that partly, because I did even mention in my review for that episode that they were making him too much of a nice guy, but he was still being an asshole. So it wasn't too bad. But what I disagree with is when they listed the episodes that portrayed Dukat more of an ally, they listed Civil Defense, which I totally disagree with. I think Civil Defense actually portrayed Dukat correctly, because he was a total asshole. Like, he was threatening to have Deep Space Nine destroyed unless Kira allowed them to have Cardassians, a garrison of Cardassians on board the station. So that is highly manipulative. That is being a total ass. That is being total villain. And then, later he got his just desserts when when that program turned on him, and it was so great. Now, granted, they did kind of team up with him to try to overcome the situation, but that's only after he got stuck on the station. So that was more about self-preservation than it was about helping them out, as we've seen very clearly that he was willing to let them all die. So I disagree with Civil Defense being lumped into that, because I think he was a flat-out villain in that, which he should be, which I love. But they included the episode Defiant, and that I agree with. They made him too friendly. And even in that episode, though, they would have lines of dialogue that would show that he's still self-absorbed and still selfish and still a dick, still an asshole. And they did this throughout his appearances, but still, I think it wasn't until season 4 with those 2 episodes that they made them too nice. Now, there's a line where Kira and Sisko are watching Dukat's speech, and he says, I make this vow that Cardassia would be made whole again, or whatever, and after they finish watching it, Kira says, well, I have a vow to make too. Next time I see Dukat, I'm going to kill him. And I don't think they properly followed up on this. I mean, they kind of did with the Dominion take over the station arc at the start of season 6. It did show how adversarial Dukat and Kira were to each other, and I did like that. But after that, they started to make it more about Sisko and Dukat, which I understand their instinct to do that because Sisko's the main character and Dukat's the main villain. But I still feel like that was a mistake, that the focus should have been on Kira and Dukat, not Sisko and Dukat. I know they did have the episode Covenant, which got back to their feud, but not really. I think Kira vowing to kill Dukat, that should have been what ended the show. That should have happened in the finale. It should have been Kira that killed Dukat, but they wanted to do this crazy fantasy good versus evil with the main character fighting the main villain, blah blah blah. I still think that was a mistake, that it should have been Kira that killed Dukat. I heard some people say it should have been Worf because Dukat killed Jadzia, but no, that was kind of the dumb side thing. I don't think it should have been Worf at all, but it should have been Kira. Anyway, so let's get into this episode specifically. Why did I say that I wasn't as big on this episode as many other people are? And the main reason is I'm not a fan of prison storylines, specifically when, you know, a show has an episode or two where the main characters get put in prison because you know they're going to escape. And usually how they escape is silly and unrealistic, and I just wish that they never had them put in prison in the first place. Whereas in this case, it's funny because the way they escape makes no sense, because why would the Dominion not only leave the runabout by the prison, but not just leave it by the prison, they took it to the prison because they encountered them in this nebula. So it's implied that the Dominion like took the runabout back to the prison, left it orbiting the prison, and made it, and didn't even like have any safeguards that would prevent them from beaming from the. Now, granted, I know Garak had to manipulate the bullshit in order to beam them aboard, but still, that shouldn't have even been possible. Like the runabout shouldn't have even been anywhere near the prison, and there should have been more like shields and safeguards that prevent them from beaming out. It's funny because they even point this out in the episode Inquisition. I talked about that when I reviewed that episode, how Sloane was like, oh, the Dominion let you escape. Now, we later find out in that episode that Sloane was full of shit, and that wasn't the case because he was saying Bashir was a reprogrammed spy, like a maturing candidate type situation. And we find out that's all nonsense. That's just something Sloane made up to test Bashir. So we do, in fact. So, in other words, there's actually never an explanation given on why the runabout was left there. But it's pointed as like the writers are pointing out their own mistakes, being like, yeah, that was actually a huge flaw. Let's actually use that and point it out. But they didn't come up with a solution for that flaw, so all they ended up doing was pointing to their mistake, pointing out their mistake and making it more obvious. Which, I don't know, it's kind of funny. But in general, like the whole, like every time we went back to the prison, I was kind of bored. Like, for one thing, it was just like Worf getting into these constant fights with the Jem'Hadar and getting, you know, kicking ass but getting hurt. I didn't care. Like, I don't really care. Like, that's not that interesting to me. And I wasn't a huge fan of the reveal that Anabrantain was Garak's father. I don't, like, I've heard someone say they thought it was obvious, but for me, it's like, I disagree. I think it made a lot more sense and worked better to have Anabrantain being a mentor figure. To go the distance to say, oh, he's his father, I think is unnecessary, and it doesn't really add anything to anything, and it seems a bit silly, like a Darth Vader reveal for no reason. Like, yeah, I don't know. I didn't really think it was necessary. And also, all the people in the prison are way too friendly with each other. Now, I do realize, like, camaraderie, people being stuck in a situation like that together will form bonds or whatever and get used to each other. And most of them were seen to have been there for a long time. But even so, I still feel like there should have been more conflict. And Martok came off as way too nice and understanding of other cultures. I don't know, that's just me. They all seem too friendly buddy with each other. Romulan, a Breen, a Klingon, I don't know. Starfleet officers, yeah, I don't know. This Cardassian, like, they all seem too buddy. I don't know. Just me. Even for the prison situation. But, yeah, I mainly don't like these prison storylines because, yeah, the way they get out is unrealistic, and it's just about them being stuck in the prison. They're main characters, so you know they're going to get out by the end of the episode. So I'm just not a fan of that. And it's funny because I was reading that this original idea for this episode was that about Eddington making an escape, and it was supposed to, like, try to get you to relate to Eddington and show it from his perspective, but then they realized that wasn't a good idea because people didn't really care about Eddington, and so they did this instead. So I do agree this is a better. I don't think this prison story is necessary. And plus, I wasn't that huge of a fan of the Garak-Worf team-up. I don't think it worked as well as the Garak-Odo team-up that they did in Probable Cause in the Dice cast. Here, it's just, especially this scene where Garak is like, I want to join Starfleet, and he's just lying for the sake of it. Like, meh. And plus, I don't think Garak was that good of a character in this two-part, if I'm being honest. Like, I feel like, again, they made him too friendly. They made him too much of a good guy. And it's like, in the Pale Moonlight is them course-correcting from this episode. And saying, no, he's a fucking devious bastard that you can't trust. And I think they got a bit too far away from that portrayal. I mean, they had the whole thing about, lying to Worf, but that was petty. Like, that wasn't, I don't know, like, they kept the core of his character. Like, they didn't totally change his character, like Bog, but still, it's kind of, yeah, I don't know. They had him just be a little bit too nice. And so, yeah, so those aspects of this episode I didn't particularly care for. I did not like the fact that this is the episode that they made Garak and Ziyal be a couple. They weren't a couple before. They were just two Cardassians hanging out, enjoying the heat. And now they're, like, romantically involved. And I think massive mistake, not just because of the age difference, but the age difference is the thing. Now, I did look up. I've been saying that Ziyal was 14 in Indiscretion, but I wasn't sure about that. So I looked it up to see definitively what her age was in Indiscretion. It was actually 19. They said that the ship crashed 14 years ago, so I was assuming that she was 14, but I guess they're implying that she was 5 years old when the ship crashed, which makes sense. So that she was actually 19. And the actress they had playing her, even though she was 24 when she played her in Indiscretion, she looked a lot younger. It made me think that she was 14. And so, still. So if she was 19 in Indiscretion, I mean she's like 20 in this episode. And Garak is at least in his late 40s, probably 50s. So, I mean, it's not illegal to have a 19 or 20-year-old be with someone in their 50s, but it's kind of icky. Definitely way more so than the Kessin Neelix thing. Don't get me started on that. Like, people like complain about that, but because she's only 2 years old. No, she ages differently. She's in her 20s. Neelix is in his 30s. Big whoop. This is a much worse, having a 20-year-old be with someone in their 50s. Now, granted, it's not as bad as I initially thought, because I initially thought she was supposed to be 14, which would have been way worse. But then again, this gets into the fact she was recast. So, I looked into this, and I don't know if it's true, because the information I saw wasn't completely reliable, but from what I saw, the reason why Sarah Batten, I believe her name was, the actress who originally played Ziyal in Indiscretion and Return to Grace, the reason why she was recast is because the producers didn't really like her. They didn't think she was that effective of convincing of an actress, and they knew that they wanted to make Ziyal more important and prominent, so that's why they recast her. So they recast her with, oh god, I can't remember her name. I want to call her Bonnie, but that was her character from Lost. Yeah, I don't know. I'm too lazy to look it up. I said her name on my channel before. They replaced her with that actress, and the reason why she got replaced was exactly what Armin Shimmerman had guessed, because she didn't like being under that makeup, and she couldn't stand the heavy makeup, and so she quit. But there was a second reason on why, or at least they took the opportunity after she refused to come back. Part of the reason why they recast is to cast someone older, which is what I thought. And I was wondering which one it was, but it turns out it's both. It's a combination of both. The actress didn't want to do it, and they wanted to recast someone who looked older because they wanted to put her with Garak. So they cast a woman who was in her mid-30s to play a 20-year-old, which is, I admit, not the most unheard of thing in Hollywood. You can look at things like Beverly Hills 90210, where most of these teenagers were played by actors in their 30s or late 20s. So it's not the most unheard of thing in the world, but you can really tell that she looks like way older in this, and especially compared to Indiscretion. I mean, the actress is 10 years older than the actress who played her in Indiscretion. And that was totally intentional. And I honestly, even though the wiki said Ziyal's like 21 at the time of her death, I'm pretty sure that the intention here was to retcon her age and to say that she's in her late 20s or early 30s. Totally feel like that, like if the writers had a say, if they mentioned her age, they would say all of a sudden, let's just retcon her age. I think that was totally, maybe it was like a soft retcon. It was a quiet retcon where they didn't state it explicitly, but really that was their intention. And it's funny because in this episode, I never noticed this, someone, maybe it's Kira, has a line where she says, "Oh, she's a grown woman." And I'm thinking to myself, is she though? Like, isn't she supposed to be 14? But it turns out I was wrong. She's actually meant to be 20. And you could call a 20-year-old a grown woman, so fair. But I still feel like they're trying to make her a lot more grown. A lot older than she should be. And I still find her relationship with Garak disgusting. And not only that, it's not just the age thing. It's the fact that I don't really buy it. They don't really have chemistry, and I like the idea of them just being two friends who both are Cardassians and can relate to each other in that manner and can have breakfast like Bashir. Like, Bashir doesn't have to be a lover of Garak either, even though I know a lot of people wanted them to be. And they could be, but they weren't. That is not what was established. And so they work well as friends. I think Ziyal would have worked well as friends. I think, actually, and they don't actually go anywhere with this anyway. I think they realized what a mistake it was in season 6, and they kind of quietly pushed it aside. Like, she dies before even being reunited with Garak. So yeah, and this is the episode that introduces that. Also introduces the actress Melanie Smith, I believe her name is, and she will remain the Ziyal actress until Ziyal's death in season 6. She played Jerry Seinfeld's girlfriend in an episode of Seinfeld. I mean, that's how old she is. But anyway, it was the 2 episodes actually. She was in the one in the Hamptons or whatever. But anyway, anywho, anyhow. Yeah. So I like the course correction aspect of the episode, and the episode is interesting enough on its own merits. It has some really good character interactions with Dukat and Kira. I love what they do with Dukat. It's exciting having the Klingon Romulan fleet show up. I think maybe it's a little bit of a letdown to have it there actually be no Dominion fleet and it's just a changeling trying to destroy the system. That's kind of a letdown. But the whole storyline with Bashir being a changeling, fucking amazing. Now, as for the aspect, and I have been talking about this as I've been going through the prior episodes, that Bashir in the prison is wearing the old Starfleet uniform, which suggests that all the episodes with Bashir wearing the new uniform was actually the changeling, which means that the changeling did complex brain surgery on Sisko in the episode. What was that episode called? Was it Rapture? Yeah, Rapture. And he was the one that helped Kira give birth in the episode The Begotten. He's also the one that tried to help the baby changeling but couldn't in the episode The Begotten. And I'm sorry, none of that really adds up. Well, the whole thing with him being the one who helped give birth to Kira's baby, that could be the case. But performing complex brain surgery, I'm sorry. How well did this changeling study? Like, I'm sorry. No, I'm calling bullshit on that. And also bullshit on that he wouldn't do more for a baby changeling. Like, he could have actually, like, linked with it. Now, I think it's very clear that the writers didn't decide to do this until this episode. I did hear a rumor that they actually meant to set it up in the previous episode for the uniform, where they would have a scene with Bashir, and they told Alexander Siddig, "Oh, you're actually a changeling," but that scene got deleted. So, but they definitely in those prior episodes, Rapture, Begotten, all that shit, obviously had no idea that was supposed to be the changeling, and more importantly, and this is confirmed, Alexander Siddig had no idea he was supposed to be a changeling. He even complained about that, saying if they had told me this, I would have portrayed him a little bit different, because he did portray him a little bit different in this two-parter. You can tell, which I think is a nice touch. Like, it's subtle enough not to be obvious, but if you know what to look for, you're like, yeah, he's a little bit off. But if you notice any behavior of Bashir in the prior episodes where he seems to be a little bit off, that is coincidental. That is just a placebo effect, because he wasn't intentionally playing him differently, which he could have been. And so I think that was mishandled. I think they should have just had him in the new uniform. That way it wouldn't suggest that he's been a changeling for all these prior episodes. Like, if they had him in a new uniform, then it's possible he could have been a changeling in the prior episodes, but possible not. I think that would have been a better play, to leave it ambiguous. Either that, or actually tell Alexander Siddig in advance, look, you're a changeling. Act a bit differently. That would have been worked as well. That, so yeah. So whatever. Also, the whole thing, getting back to Worf having his fights with the Klingons, with the Jem'Hadar, the whole thing with the ending where the Jem'Hadar first was like, I yield, and the Vorder being like, kill them both. That was so... I hate that. That made no sense. Why the fuck... It was supposed to show him being like an honorable Jem'Hadar, but what was the point of that? Like, I don't buy it. I didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. This is another sort of dent I had on the episode. But for the most part, yeah, I think it was pretty exciting with some flaws. So not the best episode ever, but goddamn, did I love the course correction. Did I love the course correction. Anyway, especially the scenes with Dukat, like having on the planet doing his For All Our Sons speech, like that was amazing. Like, this is Deep Space Nine. This is what Deep Space Nine should do. Look at the Minion has a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant. Dukat's a bad guy. He's making this evil speech. Like, this is what Deep Space Nine is. It is so good. Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. Very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson and Brandon Neilhouse. Thank you both so very, very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler C., Benjamin Mead, Antarius, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Alright, so we have a few Patreon comments for this episode. Let's find it. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "In Purgatory Shadow by Inferno's light. More like, Jim, burn this story please now. I burn it tonight." That was a tough one, but I made it work and delivered a great pun. You're welcome. You're all welcome, especially you, Antarius. Isn't this the ones with fake Bashir and Worf fighting and stuff, while Garak messes with some stuff in the little crawl space? This is a great episode. One of the best Deep Space Nine did, almost as good as Move Along Home. You know what would have worked? Instead of trying to mess with the electronics in the wall, Garak should have just dropped to the floor and said, "Please!" like Quark. That trick works every time. Then Jim Hadar would have been like, "Oh, sure, you can head out. Drive safely out of there." Anyway, here's Wonderwall. I don't know what you mean by that last statement. You know, they could have had when they caught the changeling of Bashir. And they said, "Oh my God, you're not Bashir," and he could be like, "Yeah, that's right, because I'm not in Starfleet." Sorry, that was a bad one, but but I liked it anyway. Who gives a fuck? Now that you bring up Garak and his being in that tiny space, reminds me of his claustrophobia, which. So many things about this episode to talk about. This video is going to be so long. Forgot to mention that. Because I can actually relate to that a lot more. Because it's funny because when I was younger, I was never claustrophobic. But the older I got, the more claustrophobic I became. And I'm to the point now where I'm quite claustrophobic. Even watching those scenes with Garak in the tiny space does make me on edge. Not as bad as I just watched Kill Bill, and even thinking about this makes me but the scenes where she was buried alive in this coffin and she's in this tight space 6 feet underground, and she has to cut herself loose and punch through the thing, just that whole sequence was just really panicky. So I can relate to Garak is what I'm saying. And this will come up later on in season 7 when Ezri has to cure his claustrophobia. But yeah, anyway. Next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "Part 1 of this story is great. Part 2 is ouch, source of flight." Since I have a lot to talk about with Part 2, I will continue in the next episode as Bashir accidentally eats a computer and maybe when Odo forgets about his obsession with Kira. I love the way Garak is practicing lying like it's a sport. Every time Miles O'Brien says the quote, "You're a gentleman and a scholar," I always wait for him to say this part. "And a good judge of a blonde." As my boss always said that part, and I always say it back to him, I prefer brunettes. So my rating for part 1 is a 10. The reason why Garak was almost able to still run about is because Odo was too busy redoing his room out of 10. What about part 2? But anyway, guess you're going to mention that in the next review, I suppose you said. But I never heard that thing, a good judge of a blonde. never heard of that until just this second. So, new one for me. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, apparently I've seen this 2-part episode before. No details seemed familiar to me, and so it was a fun and suspenseful watch. The episode features many great character scenes. I was so surprised when Bashir suddenly showed up in prison. What a magnificent reveal. But do the changelings know so much about human medicine that the imposter can perform all of Bashir's duties without any fault, including complex brain surgery? Just gotta add that in there. If the mission is so dangerous, why do they take a runabout and not the Defiant, which is not only much more powerful but also has a cloaking device? But we all know the answer. Finally, the Dominion story arc becomes the most important storyline again, and the days of the Klingon War are ultimately over. Thank God. And finally, Dukat becomes the bad guy again after defecting to the Dominion. It was a bit ridiculous how easily the alliance between the Klingons and the Federation was reinstalled with a few seconds with a simple fingerprint. Well, hopefully in real life the relationship between the US and the EU can be repaired as quickly and easily under a new administration. Let's hope. It was also ridiculous that the runabout was still in orbit around the prison asteroid. I have a hard time believing that the Dominion runs any prison camps at all. They don't seem to be the type to spare the lives of Bashir or Martok, since they have no further use for them except maybe as work slaves. If it were really that easy to make a sun explode, then a few cloaked kamikaze spaceships could destroy the worlds of the Federation within a short time. But despite all these problems, my rating is a 10 out of 10. I mean, Soren destroyed stars that easily in Generations. I do feel like, I talked about this when I did my revisited for the uniform, when how easy it was for Eddington to poison Cardassian worlds and how easy it was for Cisco to poison Maquis worlds, that this should be more of like a defense system. I think the same thing applies for these suns. There should be defense systems that prevent people from doing this, but again, you know the answer, as you said. The answer, of course, is so the episode can happen. Now, I thought the exact same thing about why didn't they take the Defiant to look for an Abrantane, but as you say, the answer is so the episode can happen. It would have made much more sense. And by the way, another thing I forgot to mention about this episode, I think this is speaking of course corrections, there's another course correction I forgot to mention. We see Kira in command of the Defiant. I think we may have seen this before, but still. This is really establishing her that Kira can command the Defiant. And for the people who complain, well, she's not in Starfleet, I say, who gives a fuck? She is supposed to be the first officer of the show, so she should be the first officer of the show, period, point blank. Whether on Deep Space Nine or the Defiant, she should be in command, not Worf. This whole bullshit of a Worf commands the Defiant and Kira is his subordinate was total bullshit, and I'm pretty sure will not be the case going forward. So yet another course correction for course correction, the two-parter. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, some good things. The course correction two-parter introduces the real Martok, who would become one of my favorite Trek characters. The Bashir reveal, unlike the following future episode's bad Bashir reveal, and finally restoring the Federation and Klingon as an uneasy allies, as it was always should have been for at least since the end of Way of the Warrior. And the Cardassians are the definite baddies again, teaming up with the Dominion, with Dukat revealing who he really is at the helm. Yes, that's there's that nitpick of leaving the runabout above, but An episode next year addresses that plot hole, well, as a plot hole, lol, and in general quite compelling. I did like the interesting quirk of Garak having claustrophobia. In a way, it is good remembering The Wire that he has some personal faults / anxieties, and we will see some more later. So sharing a bunk with the Breen means you never see that one outside the refrigerator outfit. I'll give this one 9 victories life battles to the death out of 10. So what do we got so far? We got 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, and 9 out of 10. Alright, so next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, I was 16 when the episode aired and remember being so excited when it was first teased, and I was hopeful it would be as good as Improbable Call / The Dice Cast. But I was super let down at the time. Worf and Garak are okay together, but don't have the same chemistry that Garak and Odo have. I was really expecting a big battle in part 2, but eventually got that next season. This episode works as a setup for the action to come. I do remember being shocked when Dukat joined the Dominion, and that was absolutely a genius writing move. You've mentioned closing the wormhole before. It's never explicitly stated in the show, but my headcanon is that after the mind experiment in the search, the founders realized if they pushed too hard, the Federation would close the wormhole, so they toned down their aggression, e.g. using changeling infiltrators to gather more information, no direct attacks in the Alpha Quadrant or colonies, until they found a solution which they implemented in this episode. Maybe that's headcanon, but that's the way I've always thought about it, the wormhole problem. Actually, that does make a lot of sense. I will buy that. That does make sense because they did that test in the Search Part 2 where they would test to see how they would react to the Dominion trying to make an incursion in the Alpha Quadrant, and it led to them closing the wormhole. And so, yeah, that actually makes total sense. That's why they backed off. Until they found the solution, which they did in this episode. Not only with Bashir, the fake Bashir, like propping the wormhole open, but also establishing a foothold in Cardassian space. So actually, that really does track a lot. I still think that Starfleet should have collapsed the wormhole earlier, though. They should have used their the same technology they were gonna use that they tried to use in this episode. They should have already did that instead of let's keep exploring the Gamma Quadrant, even though we know there's this big ass evil empire that wants to conquer us that you can only get to through this wormhole. They should have collapsed it. Sorry, but they should have. But again, then we wouldn't have the Dominion in the show anymore. But just it makes it a flaw, though, I think. By the way, I forgot to mention, I totally forgot about this, that Lenora Khan is mentioned in this episode. That is the character from the episode Rejoined, one of my favorite episodes. I forgot that they mentioned her. They're saying that it was her formula that would help collapse the wormhole safely. But if I remember, what she did in Rejoined was to create an artificial wormhole, not work with the already established Bajoran wormhole. So I don't know how much sense it makes that she would be the one to do it. But I do appreciate the callback. I appreciate the mention. Jadzia has like a quick line about, Lenora could never do this right or something like that, saying that it's funny that seems like she's gotten over her. Or maybe that's her way of kind of dealing with the pain, is being dismissive like that. So I do appreciate that aspect of it. Also, in terms of call-outs, we also, and I talked about this in my Revisited for First Contact, we get a mention of the movie First Contact. I think the only one Deep Space Nine did, where Sisko has a line where he says that Starfleet is weakened with the recent Klingon War and the Borg attack. So it's just a very quick throwaway line of them acknowledging the Borg attack in First Contact, which in the timeline of a thing happened very recently. In fact, apparently they said that the star date of First Contact is later than the star date of this two-parter, and Ronald D. Moore had some smart-ass response to that about where, because the ultimate answer is who gives a fuck. I mean, not even I am that nerdy where I care. And I'm super nerdy, as you know. So, yeah, like, who cares? This was released after First Contact, so it makes sense that this takes place after First Contact. And I did talk about in my revisited for First Contact how Ira Steven Behr didn't want to mention First Contact at all. That's why it was never mentioned. That's why we never find out why Worf went off on the Defiant by himself instead of Sisko. Because Ira Steven Behr didn't want anything. And in fact, he talked about how he could have mentioned it. And I believe the episode Rapture, or no, maybe it was a different episode, that they could have just had a line about how the Defiant was being repaired. And it was suggested, but he didn't want to be. He didn't like what they did with the Defiant in First Contact, so he didn't want to acknowledge it. So they at least acknowledged that the Borg attack happened in this episode. So that's as far as they were willing to go. I still think that the episode Things Past would have been the perfect opportunity to them to say, because Sisko is incapacitated, most of the other crew were incapacitated or busy, it would have been a perfect opportunity to be like, oh, the Borg are attacking Worf, you have to go off and take the Defiant. They really should have done that in Things Past, but that's, I'll stand by that, but whatever. Didn't happen. Yeah, so I do think the reveal of Dukat going off and joining the Dominion fleet was shocking. The Bashir being a changeling was shocking. So yeah, there were a lot of good moments in this episode. So anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for In Purgatory's Shadow and By Inferno's Light out of 10 is going to be an 8, extremely good. So out of the 3 Patreon supporters that did rate this episode, I'm the lowest because we had 2 10s, 1 9. Although one of the 10s was just for part 1. So I don't know if part 2 would have made a difference. But either way, I'm lower, and this goes with what I was saying earlier about how I don't love this episode quite as much as everyone else does. Still like it. I mainly like what it does for the show. And I think that's different than judging the episode on its own merits, which is what I always try to do. I can't say, oh, I love this episode because of what comes later. And it does pave the way to what comes later, but still, I feel like I need to judge the episode on its own merits, not for all the great course correction that it does. That being said, there are very positive aspects of this episode even outside the course correction. The good interactions with Dukat and Kira, doing their interactions correctly, having the great reveals of Dukat joining the Dominion, his great speech, the shocking reveal of Bashir being a changeling, that was handled well. Yeah, I mean, it was exciting, the risk of the Dominion attacking. I think the ending was a little bit anticlimactic, and it was more of like pushing the, I don't know, what's this saying, pushing the ball down the road, or is more of like, we'll handle this, we'll deal with this later sort of thing. And I actually agree that I think one of my Patreon supporters said this, that especially when I first saw it, I found the beginning of part 2 a bit disappointing because they're setting it up like there's going to be this huge Dominion invasion and we're going to attack the station, but instead they just fucked off to Cardassia. That was a bit anticlimactic, but then again, as I said, it sets up for the whole Cardassian joining the Dominion storyline, which is fucking amazing, which is the best thing that could have ever happened to the show at this point. It was a stroke of brilliance. It was the best thing to do. So ecstatic, so happy that they were doing it. So I'm willing to forgive any anticlimactic elements of the episode since it makes the show overall better. But that being said, there's a lot of flaws in this episode. Not just being anticlimactic, but the whole prison storyline I thought was boring. I thought Worf fighting someone, I couldn't care less about that. The ending where the Jemadar is like, I yield, was really stupid. Sorry, but it was. And the whole thing with Anabrantain being Garak's father, who cares? And also, like, I think Anabrantain should be dead. I know there was a catalyst for the episode, but it doesn't make any sense why they would save Anabrantain's life. I mean, I was thinking maybe they wanted to get information from him, but I don't know. It seemed like they had a changeling impersonating Lobach who was working with Anabrantain the whole time, so I don't know what more information they could get. Why? It's not just they didn't kill him. They would have had to actively save his life in order for him to survive. Why would they do that? I don't know. I think they should have... And I don't know. I think that ending for Anabrantain kind of ruins his character a little bit. I think he would have been better off had they just left it. Just my humble opinion. And yeah, the ending where it wasn't really a fleet going towards the station again was a bit anticlimactic. So yeah, I do have to ding this two-parter a bit. And that's what I was saying. When I first saw it, I was giving it a 10 out of 10, calling it one of the best episodes of the whole show. But thinking about it more, analyzing it, having time to sit with it, I realized that I just like what it did for the show more than the episode itself. If I judge the episode on its own merits, it's good, but not great. So 8 out of 10 for me. So that is it for my reviews of In Purgatory Shadow and By Inferno's Light. I keep wanting to say the Dias Cast. Keep getting it mixed up with the other two-parter. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you think of this course correction of the two-parter. And yeah, that sort of thing helps me out in the algorithm. But if you really want to support the channel, you could, as just an option, you could support me on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description below. I have different rewards for different tiers. I have a series of patron-only videos that I do exclusively for Patreon supporters, where I revisit reviews I've already done. You can also make comments on my videos that I'll read in my videos, and there's pre-releases. You can request a video for me to do that sort of thing. You can look into if you're so inclined to do so. Alright, so let's see what's coming up on the old channel here. Monday will be my review for the Voyager episode Unity. Wednesday I'll be over on Patreon doing one of those Patreon exclusive videos revisiting my review for the Voyager episode Darkling, the terrible Voyager episode Darkling. And then Thursday I'll be reviewing the newest episode of Starfleet Academy, episode 3. And then on next Saturday, back to DS9, reviewing the next DS9 episode of Dr. Bashir, I presume. Giant retcon, I presume. Anyway, that's what's coming up on my channel. Please be sure to check me out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager and many other videos on Star Trek and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.